Asterisk, I left Hollywood because of Diddy. That's what Eddie Murphy told the courtroom, and the world stopped. The man who made us laugh for decades just exposed the darkest side of fame, and what he said next left Hollywood shaking. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. I left Hollywood because of him. Those 6 words, heavy with meaning, shook the courtroom like a thunderclap. Spoken by none other than Eddie Murphy, the comedic genius, the movie icon, the Hollywood legend. They carried a weight that silenced the entire room. Eddie didn't shout. He didn't cry. He just spoke with a calm intensity that forced everyone to stop breathing for a moment. Eyes firm. Voice steady. Every camera lens in the room focused on him. Every pen paused. Every ear leaned in. For years, Eddie Murphy had kept his distance from the spotlight. Once the most bankable star in the world, he'd seemingly vanished from the big screen. Rumors came and went that he was tired of the industry, that he wanted to focus on family, that he had made enough money to retire peacefully. But nobody was ready for the real story. And as Murphy took the stand in a packed courtroom, surrounded by lawyers, press, and spectators, he revealed a truth that was darker than anyone imagined. The world listened from the very first moment. People knew this was going to be different. This wasn't Eddie doing stand-up, cracking jokes, or promoting a film. This was a man laying down the truth. The man at the center of this truth? Sean Diddy Combs, one of the most powerful names in music and entertainment. Murphy looked directly at the jury. No hesitation. No stutter. He wasn't just another figure in the industry, he said. He was the reason I walked away. He made me question everything. My values, my safety, my sanity. It wasn't an accusation thrown lightly. These were words backed by emotion, experience, and scars that had been hidden for decades. Reporters were frantically typing. Cameras zoomed in tighter. Even the judge leaned in, intrigued. Eddie Murphy, a man who had made millions laugh across the globe, was now pulling back the curtain on a part of Hollywood no one was supposed to see. The golden years and the turning point. Eddie took the courtroom on a trip through time, back to his rise in the 1980s and 90s. How he went from a teenage sensation on Saturday Night Live to box office royalty with Beverly Hills Cop, Coming to America, and The Nutty Professor. He spoke fondly of the early days, the passion, the creativity, the love for performance. But his expression changed when he started talking about the early 2000s. That's when things shifted, he said. That's when Hollywood stopped being about art and started being about control. Murphy described a growing unease. Invitations to exclusive parties in the Hollywood Hills. Late-night phone calls from unnamed producers. Whispered warnings from others in the business. And one name kept coming up in every corner of these conversations. Diddy. He wasn't just throwing parties, Murphy said. He was building a circle. A world where influence replaced integrity. Where fear silenced truth. The unseen side of the industry. Murphy explained that behind the flashing lights, red carpets, and Grammy after-parties, there was a much darker world, one where powerful figures pulled strings in exchange for loyalty. I saw young artists come in with stars in their eyes and leave broken, he said. It became clear that being in the inner circle wasn't a privilege. It was a trap. Murphy said he was invited to several events where everything looked perfect on the outside, but inside, the vibe was unsettling. Lavish rooms, security at every corner, phones taken at the door. What happened in those rooms didn't feel right, Eddie said, his voice dropping. And Diddy was always at the center, always watching. He never said he was directly threatened, but the implication was clear: participate or disappear. The moment he walked away after one particular event in 2006, Murphy said he went home and stared at himself in the mirror. That night changed me, he said. I knew I had to get out before I lost who I was. And just like that, at the peak of his fame, Eddie Murphy vanished. No press release, no scandal, just silence. People assumed he was done with acting. Some thought he lost his passion. Others believed he had simply earned his rest. But in court, Murphy made it clear. I didn't leave because I was tired of Hollywood. I left because Hollywood had stopped being real. A warning to the next generation. Murphy didn't end his testimony with bitterness. He ended with a message. To every young artist watching this, know your worth, he said. If something feels wrong, It probably is. Don't let the glitz blind you to the danger. Don't trade your peace for a paycheck. As he finished speaking, the courtroom stayed frozen in stunned silence. The judge didn't interrupt. The lawyers didn't object. For a moment, even Diddy, sitting just feet away, didn't move. Eddie stepped down from the stand, nodded politely, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back at aftermath outside. The world erupted. Social media exploded. Clips of his testimony went viral. Hashtags like hashtag Eddie Tells All and hashtag Why I Left Hollywood began trending worldwide. Fans praised his bravery. Industry insiders started whispering about their own stories. And others started preparing for what might be the biggest unraveling in entertainment history. Whether justice is served or not, one thing is clear. Eddie Murphy didn't just testify. He lit a fuse. And now, the whole world is watching what happens next. Eddie Murphy sat at the witness stand, the courtroom lights reflecting off his glasses, his voice calm but intense. What he said next would peel back the glittery mask of Hollywood and reveal something few dared to talk about. He began gently, nostalgically, almost as if he were taking the jury and the world on a walk through memory lane. I love performing, he said. From the time I was 15, I knew I was meant to make people laugh. I lived for it. He smiled slightly as he recalled the early days, the grind of late-night stand-up clubs in New York, writing jokes under flickering lights, rehearsing in his tiny apartment, and bursting on a Saturday Night Live with the kind of charisma that couldn't be ignored. The audience laughed with him, cried with him, and cheered him all the way to the top. Eddie was a star, not just a funny man, but a force of nature. From Beverly Hills Cop to Coming to America, he ruled the box office and brought joy to millions. But then, his tone shifted, the smile faded. His voice dropped half an octave. The warmth in his eyes turned serious. But something changed, he said slowly, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The turning point, it was the early 2000s. Eddie was still at the top of his game, respected, rich, and admired. Yet, behind the scenes, things had begun to feel off. There was a shift in the energy, he said, a shadow that started creeping into the business I loved. Eddie explained how, at first, he brushed it off, thinking it was just Hollywood politics or industry competition. But as the months passed, he noticed a pattern. The same names, the same faces, the same kinds of parties, the same unsettling invitations. There were events he was told he had to attend. Not movie premieres, not charity galas, but secretive, invite-only gatherings hosted by some of the most powerful people in entertainment. These weren't just industry mixers, he said. They were carefully controlled environments, exclusive, tightly guarded, and deliberately mysterious. And in almost every one of those spaces was Sean Diddy Combs, the hidden world behind the spotlight. Eddie paused and took a deep breath before continuing. I saw things I couldn't unsee, he said quietly. And Diddy, he was always there. Murphy made it clear he wasn't accusing Diddy of anything specific, at least not directly. But what he was describing was a disturbing pattern. He painted a picture of lavish parties in Beverly Hills mansions, some of them seemingly harmless at first, filled with celebrities, champagne, and laughter. But once you got past the flashing cameras and red carpet charm, something darker seemed to lurk underneath. There was a different energy in those rooms, Eddie explained. It wasn't about fun. It wasn't even about networking. It was about power. Phones were often taken away at the door. Security guards stood at every entrance. Once inside, the guests, usually stars, producers, and upcoming talent, were expected to play along with whatever the host desired. It was, Eddie said, like a twisted audition. A test of loyalty. He didn't go into explicit details, but he didn't have to. His voice, measured, grave, made it clear that what he experienced changed him forever. The price of fame. Eddie began to distance himself from that world. I realized that if I kept going to those places, if I kept surrounding myself with those people, I was going to lose something bigger than my career. I was going to lose myself. He described how the industry had become less about creativity and more about control. Music, movies, and fame were just the surface. Beneath that, he claimed, was a complex web of power plays, manipulation, and silent agreements. You start to see people disappear, he said. Not literally, but emotionally, spiritually. You see people with dreams get caught in deals they don't understand, surrounded by people they can't trust. And through it all, Murphy noticed that Diddy always seemed to be in the middle of the most exclusive rooms, pulling strings, hosting events, whispering to the right people at the right time. Every time I thought I was done with that world, he'd be there again, Eddie added. Different mansion, same game. A silent exit. Murphy knew he couldn't speak up back then. The power Diddy held, along with others in that circle, was enormous. Careers could be ended with a single phone call. Reputations could be shattered overnight. Instead of going to war, Eddie made a quiet choice. I didn't do a press tour. I didn't write a book. I just stepped away. He said no to more scripts, declined more red carpet events, turned down millions of dollars just to preserve something money couldn't buy: his peace. People thought I was tired. They thought I retired early, he said. But the truth is, I escaped. Murphy didn't say Diddy was the sole reason he left, but he made it crystal clear that Diddy represented the culture that drove him away. A culture of secrecy, manipulation, and silent control. Speaking up, finally now. Years later, Eddie finally found the courage to speak. I stayed silent because I was afraid, he confessed. But I'm not afraid anymore. He ended his testimony by urging the next generation of artists to be careful, to trust their instincts, and to never trade their truth for a taste of fame. Hollywood needs to change, Eddie said. And that change starts with the truth. Eddie Murphy didn't flinch when he spoke that he wasn't angry. He wasn't looking for revenge, that he was just telling the truth, calmly, clearly, and powerfully. Diddy wasn't just a music mogul, Eddie said, locking eyes with the jury. He had influence in places most people didn't even realize. That single sentence shifted the entire tone of the courtroom. Up until that point, people thought they were hearing about awkward parties, Hollywood politics, and maybe some ego-driven drama behind the scenes. But now, it felt like something else entirely. Something bigger, more calculated, more dangerous. Eddie wasn't talking about music. He was talking about control. The hidden influence. According to Murphy, Sean Diddy Combs wasn't just a successful figure in hip-hop. He was a gatekeeper. A man with deep connections in music, movies, fashion, and even political circles. He had power over labels, studios, parties, careers, Eddie said. If you didn't play along, you were out. Simple as that. Murphy described this not as paranoia, but as a pattern. He recalled people warning him, sometimes quietly, sometimes bluntly. Be careful, they'd say. Don't cross him. It wasn't about Diddy picking fights. It was about how easily he could make someone vanish from the industry. One word to the right executive. One rumor at the wrong time. One invitation you declined. And your phone stopped ringing. The exclusive events. Murphy described receiving invitations to events that weren't posted on Instagram. No flyers. No media coverage. Just a name, a time, and a location. Always a mansion in the hills. Always guarded like a fortress. They weren't networking events, he said. They were auditions for loyalty. Eddie painted a picture that left the courtroom stunned. Long driveways lit with golden lights. Valets taking keys and phones. Security guards scanning guests at the door. Inside, music, luxury, familiar faces, but something about the atmosphere felt staged, controlled. There were celebrities, models, producers, influencers, even politicians, he said. Everyone acting like they belonged there. But nobody looked relaxed. Everyone looked like they were waiting for someone's approval. He recalled one night in particular, a lavish party thrown by Diddy in the early 2000s. Eddie said he walked in, felt the pressure in the air, and instantly regretted being there. You could feel it, he said. It wasn't about celebration. It was about watching who played along, who said no, who stayed too long, who left too early. The disappearing talent. One of the most chilling moments in Eddie's testimony was when he spoke about the young artists, fresh faces who showed up at parties wide-eyed, full of ambition. People who wanted a shot in the industry thought they were being welcomed, he said, pausing. But they were being trapped. Murphy said he saw talented individuals, singers, actors, comedians, enter Diddy's inner circle. At first, it seemed like their big break. They were invited to the right events, introduced to major producers, and suddenly rising fast. But then, they vanished. Not literally, Eddie clarified. But they stopped getting roles. They stopped performing. Some disappeared from the public eye altogether. Others spiraled. Addiction, breakdowns, scandals. It was like a curse. He said. He started to see a pattern: success followed by silence. Big promises followed by complete erasure. And always, quietly behind the scenes, Diddy's name would float in the background. Pressure behind the curtain. Eddie didn't portray himself as a victim, but he did reveal the intense pressure he faced. There were moments, he said, when I was told flat out, "You should be there." If he skipped a party, someone would ask about it the next day. If he declined a project, he'd get a call from someone who just wanted to check in. And always, behind the politeness, was a message: conform or be forgotten. Eddie said it wasn't physical threats. It wasn't even direct manipulation. It was the system itself, one designed to test your silence, reward your obedience, and punish your refusal. You don't need a gun to control people in Hollywood, he said. You just need access, influence, fear. The breaking point then came the line that sent a chill through the courtroom, and later, through millions watching clips of the testimony online. "I didn't leave Hollywood because I lost my passion," Eddie said. "I left to protect my soul." That silence returned. The kind of silence that only truth can create. Murphy said he came to a point where he had to make a choice: keep playing the game or walk away before it consumed him. It wasn't about money. I had that. It wasn't about success. I'd already tasted it. It was about dignity. He explained that Hollywood had become a place where people smiled at you on camera and whispered behind your back, where fame could be used as a leash, where the higher you climbed, the more you owed. A final warning. Murphy concluded this part of his testimony with a message for every young artist trying to break into the entertainment world. Be careful what you chase, he said. Fame is addictive, and in the wrong hands, it becomes a weapon. He said not everyone in the industry is corrupt, but there are systems in place, built by powerful people, that thrive on silence and submission. If someone opens a door for you, ask what's behind it. If someone promises you everything, ask what they want in return. The courtroom had never felt colder. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes every breath feel heavier than the last. When Eddie Murphy finished speaking, the silence wasn't just quiet, it was staggering. People in the gallery weren't just watching a trial. They were witnessing history. Even seasoned reporters, the ones who had covered murder trials, political scandals, and decades of Hollywood chaos, looked rattled. Some whispered in disbelief. Others simply sat frozen, pens hovering above notepads, eyes locked on Murphy as if trying to process what they'd just heard. And just feet away sat Sean Diddy Combs, clad in an orange jumpsuit, expressionless, emotionless, and no reaction, no denial, just cold silence. Diddy didn't flinch. He didn't shake his head. He didn't raise an eyebrow. His face was carved from stone, cold and unreadable. As the accusations rained down, his legal team tried everything to stop the storm. They objected. They interrupted. They tried to steer the testimony away from unrelated character claims. But it didn't work. The judge, who had stayed composed throughout the case, looked directly at the defense table and simply said, "Let the man speak his truth." And that was it. The room leaned in. The tension cracked open. And Eddie kept going, not with anger, but with conviction, with clarity, with a voice that echoed through the chamber and beyond. More than a testimony, a wake-up call. "This isn't just about me," Eddie said, voice steady but firm. "This is about every young artist who steps into this industry thinking it's a dream, thinking it's safe." He spoke slowly, deliberately, letting every word sink into the hearts of everyone watching, in the courtroom, on the live streams, and across the world. "Don't sell your piece for popularity," he said. "Don't trade your truth for a trophy." You could hear people gasp. Some wiped away tears. Some nodded silently, as if Eddie had just said something they had always felt but never dared say aloud. He talked about the masks people wear in the industry, the smiles that hide fear, the awards that disguise regret, the fame that becomes a cage. "Hollywood isn't what it looks like on TV," Eddie warned. "It's not all red carpets and flashing lights. Behind the curtains, there's a darkness. And if you don't stand firm, it swallows you." The outside reaction, even before Eddie left the stand, the world was already reacting. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered: fans, journalists, supporters, holding signs that read, "We stand with Eddie," and "Truth over fame." Some wore Eddie Murphy movie t-shirts. Others simply held up their phones, broadcasting the moment live to tens of thousands watching from around the world. The second Eddie stepped off the stand, social media exploded. Within minutes, hashtags began trending worldwide. Fire hashtag Eddie spoke truth. Fire hashtag Murphy versus Diddy. Fire hashtag Diddy exposed. Fire hashtag protect the artist. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, everywhere you looked. People were talking, not just about what Eddie said, but about what it meant. The internet breaks. Clips of Eddie's testimony went viral almost instantly. The line, "I didn't leave Hollywood because I lost my passion, I left to protect my soul," was shared over 20 million times in less than 24 hours. Celebrities began weighing in. Some offered vague tweets, things like, "Much respect to Eddie," or "It's time people knew the truth." Others were more direct, sharing their own subtle experiences of discomfort, pressure, or silence in the industry that a few even admitted. "I've been to those parties. I left early too." Fans were stunned, not because they doubted Eddie, but because they never thought he'd be the one to say it out loud. This wasn't a B-list actor or a jaded ex-celebrity. This was Eddie Murphy, a legend, a household name, a global icon who had everything to lose by speaking out and still chose to do it. The power of one voice. What made Eddie's testimony so powerful wasn't just the details. It was the courage. For years, rumors had circulated. Whispers in backrooms, Reddit threads, conspiracy videos. But now, it wasn't speculation. It was real. It was on record. And it came from a man who knew the game inside and out. By speaking up, Eddie gave others permission to do the same. In the days that followed, more stories began surfacing. Actors, assistants, dancers, producers, all sharing pieces of a puzzle that had been hidden in plain sight. The industry had kept its secrets for decades. But now, the seal had been broken, and people were finally listening. Eddie's final words as Eddie walked out of the courtroom that day, surrounded by cameras, microphones, and security. He didn't give a press statement. He didn't wave or smiled. He just turned to the crowd and said one thing: "Stay true to who you are. That's the only fame that matters." And with that, he stepped into the van, disappearing from view once again, not out of fear, but out of freedom. The courtroom was still spinning as Eddie Murphy stood. He didn't linger. He didn't bask in attention. He didn't even look back. He simply nodded at the judge, a respectful gesture, and walked out, calm and silent. Final mic drop statement. No emotional breakdown. Just a man who had said what he came to say and left. Outside, the media frenzy erupted. Dozens of cameras swiveled toward the door as he emerged. Microphones reached over barricades. Journalists shouted his name. Fans screamed in disbelief. The internet was watching live. But Eddie? He said nothing. Not a single word. He entered the black SUV waiting at the curb, closed the door behind him, and disappeared down the street, leaving behind not just a courtroom, but a broken illusion. The internet did what Eddie wouldn't. Eddie didn't talk, but the internet didn't stop. Within minutes, clips of his testimony, raw, unedited, and spine-chilling, exploded across social media. Twitter threads, Instagram reels, TikTok breakdowns, YouTube reaction videos. Everywhere you looked, there was Eddie, sitting on that witness stand, telling the story no one thought would ever be told. He said what nobody else would say. Finally, someone from the inside speaking out. Hollywood is officially on notice. The hashtags trended globally within hours. Fire hashtag Eddie spoke truth. Fire hashtag Diddy exposed. Fire hashtag Hollywood silence. Fire hashtag protect Eddie Murphy. Memes spread. Edits went viral. And suddenly, the man who hadn't made major headlines in years became the voice of a cultural earthquake. Hollywood reacts. Inside the entertainment industry, the mood was tense. Some celebrities spoke out, cautiously but clearly. Tweets of support, Instagram stories with folded hands, medium skin tone emojis. A few posted black and white photos of Eddie with the caption, "Respect." Others stayed silent. Studios? Silent. Agencies? Silent. Major artists closely linked to Diddy? Very, very quiet. Why? Because no one wanted to be next. Eddie Murphy hadn't just pulled back the curtain. He'd ripped it off the wall and set it on fire. And now, everyone in Hollywood was suddenly wondering who else might step forward and what they might say. At a legal turning point. According to legal experts, Eddie's testimony could become a defining moment in the growing web of investigations surrounding Sean Diddy Combs. the trial isn't over. In fact, it might just be getting started. But Murphy's credibility, reputation, and clear-headed delivery left a lasting impact. He wasn't seeking fame. He wasn't promoting a book. He wasn't launching a documentary. He came, he testified, and he left, without spectacle, without spin. That, lawyers say, is exactly why his words might carry weight in court. Investigators are now reportedly working to verify Murphy's claims. More subpoenas are rumored to be in the works. And behind closed doors, insiders suggest that more witnesses are preparing to come forward. Some may echo Eddie's story. Others may add new details. But one thing is clear: the silence surrounding Diddy and the Hollywood machine he's allegedly a part of is cracking wide open Eddie's ongoing silence since the testimony. Eddie Murphy hasn't spoken to the press in no interviews. No statements. No tweets. Just silence. But that silence is powerful because his message was never about the headlines. It was never about taking down one man. It was about the truth and how the truth survives, even in an industry built on illusion. That he left the courtroom, but his words stayed behind, echoing louder with each passing day. And now, people are starting to see things differently, not just about Diddy, but about the industry itself. What if Eddie never left? For years, people asked the same question. Why did Eddie Murphy step away from Hollywood at the height of his career? He was one of the biggest stars on the planet. Box office gold, comedy legend, A-list royalty. And then, quietly, he faded from the spotlight. Sure, he made appearances, returned for a film or two, but something was missing. That spark, that presence, that joy we all knew. Now, we might finally understand why. Maybe Eddie didn't leave because he lost interest. Maybe he didn't leave because he ran out of roles. Maybe Eddie Murphy left because he knew too much, and unlike so many others, he didn't want to play along. That he didn't want to show up to the wrong party. Didn't want to trade favors for freedom. Didn't want to sacrifice his peace for prestige. So he walked away. And for years, he stayed silent. Until now, the message that shook the world in just one day. Eddie Murphy reminded us all of something simple, powerful, and real. No one is too big to speak the truth, and no one is too small to matter. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers. He didn't cry. He just told his story. And in doing so, he might have changed Hollywood forever. Eddie Murphy's courtroom testimony wasn't just a moment. It was a mirror. Now the question is, what will we do with what we see? If you believe in the power of truth, in the courage it takes to speak out, smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The story isn't over. More voices are coming, and the silence is finally breaking. Speech Balloon, let us know in the comments. Do you believe Eddie? What do you think is still being hidden in Hollywood? Because the truth doesn't disappear, it just waits for someone brave enough to say it.